Hello, once again, and welcome to Herd Immunity News. I'm Marcus Botzer. Today, we have the great pleasure in welcoming Mr. Godfrey Bloom back onto the channel. Godfrey is obviously very well known across the world, but especially in the United Kingdom, where he's a former MEP. All the great speeches that he has given over the time, they're all well worth watching. Also, his Twitter platform is incredible, as his very own website. But without further ado, let me just say, Godfrey, how are you today, sir?
I'm very good, thank you very much. In Yorkshire, cold, rather miserable. I've got a blanket on which you can't see.
Well, you're looking well, and we need you to be well, because there's not many people round like you. There's not enough people that speak out the way you do and take responsibility in the way that you have done over the years to speak about Britain's national sovereignty. Now, we've got parliamentary sovereignty, we've got national sovereignty. A lot of people are very worried right now, Godfrey, that we're being led by a prime minister who wasn't even elected by his own party, who seems to be controlled by NGOs. Now we've got a situation where immigration is running out of control. Can I just ask you, please, to give us your overview on the situation of the Conservative Party and Rishi Sunak right now?
Well, I've made the point on a number of occasions. It seems something that I sometimes think I'm sort of in some sort of huge hole in the ground that nobody else seems to get what to me is blindingly obvious. And I don't think it's that difficult to see. It is World Economic Forum policy to degrade national states. It's part of their policy. It isn't a conspiracy theory. They're totally upfront about it. They don't believe in the nation state. And they are Malthusians. They believe that the globe is overpopulated. They are quite upfront about it. There's no secret. And of course, at Davos, where they all foregather every year or so, they make all these points on a platform. And it's easily Googled. It's easy to see. It's on my website where I've swept it all up. It's not difficult to see. Anybody who wants to just Google up WEF, Carl Schwab, and all the rest of it. And of course, those who hold the levers of power in this country are all WEF agents. And they are self-confessed agents. As I say, no conspiracy theory. So we know it starts at the very top. We know our king is a WEF agent. He's quite upfront about it, and he has been for a long time. There is a question mark over whether Klaus Schwab controls him or he controls Klaus Schwab, something that we don't know and probably won't know for a while yet. So that's the king who signs off our legislation. We know that the Archbishop of Canterbury is a self-contained WEF agent. We know that that's true of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. We know that most of our senior politicians are also. We also know, do we not, that the Her Majesty's opposition is like-minded. And when Keir Starmer was interviewed, whether he felt that Parliament was should be primary or Davos, he unequivocally said Davos. Why on earth he would ask to go at a general election, vote for me, when he doesn't want to be elected, doesn't believe in being elected, and doesn't believe in Parliament? We're about to hand over to the WHO, World Health Organization, which is a very sinister organization. We have the Bank of International Settlements, we have the IMF, we have all these things for a globalist agenda, which is not a secret. It's not a secret, it's there. And so this mass immigration is quite deliberate. It's got nothing to do with the European Court of Human Rights. That's a red herring. Just think about it. And I don't understand why people don't get it. The trouble is the people who watch our channels do get it, and we're preaching to the choir. But of course, 80% of the electorate is fast asleep. They just think it's some sort of tsunami. It's just sort of like some sort of plague or plague of locusts or whatever it is, that this mass immigration is happening. We are picking, government-sponsored boats are picking up these immigrants in French waters sometimes. They are being escorted to Dover. They're also coming in by air or clinging on to lorries from Calais. It's happening all the time, but mainly Dover, as we know. They are picked up. They are then taken by bus to comfortable hotels, given 3 meals a day, healthcare and spending money. What is it that people don't get? And of course, we also know, and I haven't heard anybody, especially the new smaller political parties, with 1 or 2 noble exceptions, will have to listen to their bullshit all the time. You mobilize the Royal Navy and you send them back. You tow them back. We kept out Philip of Spain, Napoleon, the Kaiser, Hitler, by mobilizing the Dover Patrol. This isn't difficult, and I could stop it by Monday. Next Monday, I could stop it. They put me in charge and gave me a free hand. We all know that. And if the European Court of Human Rights has got nothing to do with it, the hurt feelings of the French have nothing to do with it, because they got in the way of me towing their boats back. I'd sink their boats. I'd sink their navy. We've done it before. We can do it again. The French aren't our friends. They're our enemies. They've been our enemies for 1,000 years. It doesn't mean to say we don't have friends in France. I have French friends, no question about it. But as a state, geopolitically, they are our sworn enemies, and they are facilitating this, and they're laughing as they cash the checks that we keep sending them to stop it. So that's what the problem we have about sovereignty. And of course, it should be the people who are sovereign, not Parliament or the King, the people through Parliament. And that's not happening. And it's not happening because the system of representative government has failed. We are not represented. I don't know anybody who thinks that their MP represents them or their views. I'm a big pub goer, as you know, and I love the picture of that pub behind you that you've got. That's marvelous. It looks like a good drinking man's pub. I was in the pub last night, the Wheat Sheaf in Howden, bloody good pub, yes. Affordable hand-pulled beer. And everybody there, nearly everyone there is an artisan. It's a tea time drinking pub. They get in at 4 and they go at 7, and they're all artisans, if you can use that word still. They're brickies, they're sparkies, they're joiners, they're builders. What I always call the sergeant's mess, which incidentally I wasn't clever enough to get into when I was in the army. I became an officer instead. These people are entrepreneurs, they are wealth creators, and they all agree on one thing, that we have a lousy government, a government that seems to hate us, politicians who seem to hate us. I don't know what the problem is, but there's certainly not representative government. I don't quite know what's going to come of this, because I think King Charles III, or I call him King Charles the Woke, is as bad as King Charles I. And he had his head chopped off. And I can't see, as I view these things, King Charles III is going the same way. You cannot fly in the face of popular opinion totally, and I think he will end the monarchy. I think he will end the monarchy. It's a shame, because I'm a monarchist. I've been a monarchist all my life. I hold the Queen's Commission.
Yes.
It's the Windsors that need to go. I don't know. With your background, you might think we ought to bring back the Stuarts, but they were just as stupid when they really. I maybe better bringing back the Tudors. I don't know, but we can't go on as we are. But we must understand that this is to degrade our culture. Mass immigration is to degrade our culture. It's globalists. It's true of all Western Europe, with the exception of Poland and Hungary, who aren't buying it. Open door immigration in the United States will kill their will kill them. It'll finish the United States as we know it. And I think it will see up the breakup of the United States. And I think the big states will go their own way. Texas will go their way. Arizona will go. Florida will go their own way. There's nothing in it for the red states. There's nothing in it for the red states in America. The Democratic states, of course, seem to be just going down the toilet. So this is the problem that we have. But we all need to wake up. We need to wake up. There are too many people fast asleep, and they need action. And whenever I said action this day, as Churchill used to say, action this day, people say, oh, well, what can you do? The first thing you can do in the morning, the first thing, your first tiny pinprick back at deep state is to cancel your check or cancel your banker's order to the BBC. That is the heart of the beast. Cancel it and get rid of that. And that would certainly begin to send a message. I know people who go on paying it by banker's order. I've got one chum, a very good old friend of mine. He's got a flat in a gated community and he's never there. He actually lives somewhere else. He still pays the BBC. Wakey, wakey, what is it with these people? How? And otherwise, he's an extremely intelligent and likable lad.
Sure.
But on this, and I could name a dozen friends like that who pay it because they haven't woken up. Get rid of the BBC.
Indeed.
Step one.
Indeed. And look, this battle is far from over. Far from over. Things like that, what we have, what do we have that works? Look into our weaponry, look into our armament stores, us as individuals. You talk about national sovereignty, which is what it's all about. Parliamentary sovereignty, we saw what they did to Brexit. They tried to kick it down the road time and time again. From 2016, here we are going into 2024, Godfrey. We still don't have Brexit delivered, but you're 100% right. Purchasing power, the power of the pocket. Defund all these companies and organizations that are quickening our demise. But look at Brexit, for example. What are your thoughts on what Sunak and his team have done with Brexit?
Well, they did what I said. I was interviewed about this over the last 10 years before we even had the referendum. I said, if we win the referendum, we will then have some form of associate membership. The trouble is, and I've made the analogy on a number of occasions, the electorate are on a train. And most of the passengers want to go to Scarborough, but the driver and the signalman and the guard want to go to Manchester. Now, it doesn't matter how many of us on the train want to go to Scarborough, we're going to end up in Manchester because they're driving the train. So when you have an entire civil service who voted Remain to a man, the Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords are totally Remain. They would totally Remain. And the mass of journalism wanted Remain as well. Sure. So we could vote whatever we like. We voted to leave, but of course we're not getting it. All we've done is remove our commissioners and withdraw our MEPs. We haven't rescinded anything. We're still dominated by the European Court of Human Rights, and so on and so forth. So we haven't had Brexit, and people have been saying things like, "Oh well, Mr. Bloom hasn't it a mistake? Things aren't going very well." Well, I can assure you that we haven't had Brexit. And if I was running the place, because we would deregulate massively, we're still sending billions every year to the European Union, under different guises. I'd stop all that. This business about trade negotiations, we are their major customer. We have all the cards. We are not a supplicant in trade negotiations. We buy from them. They do not buy from us. And so that puts you in a very powerful position, but we've got nobody negotiating. I could negotiate unbelievable deals if they sent me and gave me carte blanche. Unbelievable deals. I could terrorize them. Imagine if we stopped BMWs and we stopped Peugeot and we stopped Volkswagen and we stopped Mercedes. We stopped buying French wine. We buy 18% of French wine, 80% of their export French wine. It was significantly more than that in Champagne. I could cut that off and say, if you don't play ball, that's the end of that. And they would have to listen.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the appointment of David Cameron really says it all for us and a lot of our followers, that where the trajectory of the Sunak regime is going. They brought in the man who didn't want Brexit. He wanted the Brexit vote, the referendum vote, to go his way so that he could hand over further powers to EU. But look, on proportional representation, do we really have to go down this road? Is that the thing that could save us in getting say, for example, a referendum on PR?
I can't see any other way, because we have seen a massive failure in representative democracy. I'd like to go further. I'd like to go much further than that if you want a functioning democracy. First of all, we need to get back to what the original concept of democracy was in Athens all those thousands of years ago. it wasn't to give everybody a vote who attained the age of 18. That, a head count of people who of over 18. That's ridiculous. And of course, I don't know what the Greek is. I can't translate it, but I failed at school in Greek and Latin. I'm staring out the window, but never mind. It'd be interesting to translate modern Americanese, if you will, because sometimes Americanese actually hits the spot. Skin in the game. Skin in the game. If you don't have skin in the game, you shouldn't have a vote. And even Oliver Cromwell, who was a great parliamentarian, of course, he said you shouldn't get a vote for breathing the air. You have to put something into the kitty. And if you and I went to that lovely pub behind you, if we went there and a bunch of chums, and we all put 50 quid in the kitty or 40 quid in the kitty, and we'd drink ourselves to a standstill, certainly if my form has got anything to go by. If I didn't put in my money into the kitty, I wouldn't get a beer. And it'd be the same for everybody. You don't put in, you don't get a beer.
Yes.
And of course, I would also add that you shouldn't have people in the public sector, people working for the government directly or indirectly, voting, because they're just going to vote themselves more money and better pensions. So I would take them off the table. If they say, oh, well, you're disenfranchising public sector workers, I'd go, yes, I am. And if you don't want to be disenfranchised, move into the wealth creating sector. And then the second thing that I would do, I'd get rid of party politics. Now, I live in Howden and Halton Price and Howdenshire here, rural. We've got a small holding. This is a very strong Conservative seat. It's David Davis's seat, but it didn't need to be David Davis. You could put a huge, great steaming dog turd here with a blue label on, and they would vote for it. And if I crossed the river into Pontefract or Sheffield, you get the same huge piece of dung with a red label on it, and the people there would vote for it. And they're about to do that, aren't they? With that funny chap who's got lipstick in the berry, whose name always escapes me.
Yes.
They're going to put him in, and he'll wear a red label, and he'll get voted in because everybody there is a complete moron. And it's the same here. And Nigel Farage made a very good statement once, and I've always remembered it. He said, never confuse or never underestimate the stupidity of the rural Conservative.
Yes.
They're posh and they've got lots of land, but they are incredibly stupid people. Indeed. And they will go on voting for Sunak because the other people might steal their farm, or the other people might stop hunting, or whatever it happens to be. They're extremely stupid, just as stupid as the people who vote Labour on the other side of the river. So what I would say is no party politics, no labels, proportional representation. And I would stand on the hustings. Godfrey, which is really what happened when I got elected in 2004, twice in Yorkshire, with hundreds of thousands of votes, with no party machine. Basically, it was me and the dog and my mother-in-law and a mate from the rugby club. But I got elected with big numbers. Because basically you stood and got on local TV and all the rest of it and said, I'm Godfrey Bloom. This is what I believe in. No labels. So that's what we should have, an election where people vote for that bloke, Godfrey Bloom, because they agree with, or don't vote for me if they don't agree with me. So that's what we need to do. And when we do that, we'd get rid of this ridiculous Labour or Conservative, this fake unipolar game that we've got, because we know that it doesn't make any difference whether we have Sunak or Stamer. They are the same person. They're the same person.
They are. May I put to you a possible scenario or a roadmap? Because we need a blueprint to get to this. We really need to get down to how do we get from A to Z. Now, the Reform Party are, I would say, the most conservative party in the UK. They're the old Conservative Party. Obviously, you've got Reclaim, you've got other guises, UKIP, of which you remember. I'm a former member of UKIP as well. Then when Nigel left, he went to he created the Brexit Party, and then he created Reform, although he's taken a kind of backseat right now, but he's never out the game completely. He's just biding his time. Do Reform need to, these Conservative voters that can't take their head out the sand, that would vote for a Tory FE, took their house, took their missus up to bed and emptied their bank account, they'd still vote Tory. You've given a great saying about that in the adage. You could sleep with the missus and, you know, do the old Alan Clark on the family and come out the other end and he'd still vote for you. But is it up to Reform now with somebody like Nigel at the helm to try and get a handful of MPs into Parliament and start demanding that there be a referendum, question put to the country, should we go? Because they always want to go with Europe, don't they? They always think Europe's fantastic. And we're one of the few countries that have a first past the post system. Is that the blueprint? If you Reform MPs into Parliament and start making moves, or do we need to start again and have a brand new party?
Well, it's a difficult question. I've looked at this. I've looked at possible other parties. The Heritage Party is quite strong when it comes to manifesto. UKIP is still quite strong when you look at manifesto. I don't trust the Reform Party a bit.
Okay.
I don't trust them one bit.
Good, please.
I know wannabe Tories when I see them. They're wannabe conservatives. And I saw Tice's behavior with the jabs, his cuddling up to Hancock. I haven't heard him once say we mobilise the Royal Navy to stop the invasion of the boats. I think as soon as they get elected, they'd be part of deep state, part of the establishment. I don't know any of them with any intellectual depth, to be brutally frank.
Sure.
You know, I'm an Austrian school economist and geopolitical strategist by training. These people don't last very long in a conversation with me. They're woefully ill-informed if you scratch the surface. All of them, I'm sorry to say. And I'm not just talking about Reform, I'm talking about all political parties. Yes. I mean, I've sat in front of quite senior ministers over a drink when I was in office in our parliament here for one reason or another, which I won't bore you with. And I've watched them glaze over when I try and explain matters of economics or economic regulation, for example, or financial service regulation. And I say, you're not getting what I'm saying. You don't understand any of this, do you? And a minister, junior minister in the Treasury, for example, he said, well, he said, Godfrey, yes, but I've got a lot of people in my department who do. I said, name one. Everybody, the Treasury, I went into the city in 1967.
Yes.
In a broking house, very prestigious broking house as a very young fellow. I have never known the Treasury to be right about anything. Anything. Exactly. In all those years, I never knew them to be right on a single forecast. They are consistently wrong because they're civil servants from Oxford. And we all know that if you're a civil servant and you went to Oxford, you've had a lobotomy. Otherwise, you wouldn't get there. And the politicians are the same. I don't know what's wrong with Oxford. There's something wrong. I've never met anybody who's had an original thought who came out of Oxford. But this is we've got to get rid of that. We've got to get rid of that. I want to see real working men in Parliament in some way. I want to see the chippers and the sparkers and the cab drivers and the publicans. People who are real people who've done a real job. And if you look along the front benches, both front benches, they haven't done, none of them have done a real job. Exactly. So they're not in touch with what real people.
Sorry to interrupt, but it's all these spads, isn't it, that have come up as underlings. They've got the shiniest knees in Westminster. Same with the Whitehall crew. It's just friends and family. You know, there's Tory, there's the new blood, and then there's the blue blood. And sadly, the new blood doesn't get through because I've seen the machinations of the Conservative Party. They'll have a little sit down with you, and it's about cash. That's the access to do it. In Richmond, where you are, where Mr Sunak, basically, if I can put it to you, he bought his way in. He was introduced to David Cameron, and he got one of the safest seats in the country, if I'm right in saying, Richmond.
Yeah, quite right.
In Yorkshire. And the incumbent stood down, William Hague. William Hague stood out the way. He went off to the House of Lords, got a cushy job. So these machinations that people have to really wake up and see and say to themselves, I'm putting it to you. What you say about Reform is 100% true. Richard Tice backed the jab, and we've called him out on this channel. We've also interviewed him, although we didn't speak to him about the jab, because probably we'd been turfed out on our ear from where we are. But why not? Why not call them out? And that's what you do. So my question is, how do you get the people that have been conned or convinced that Reform are the answer to the Tories? How do you bring them back to reality?
Well, I hesitate to say this because it's against my sort of entire ethos and background. But if you remember when we wanted to, or well, not me in particular, but when some people wanted to get rid of the poll tax. There's nothing wrong with the poll tax. It was badly introduced and mal-calculated. But it goes back to what I say. If you don't have skin in the game, why would you get a vote? Why would you get a vote for your local government if you don't pay rates? You're not putting into the kitty. You should get. So a poll tax is quite legitimate, and I would have made it voluntary. So you don't have to register. If you don't want to register. But if you want to register, if you want to vote, you have to put in the kitty. Are you a ratepayer? No. Sorry, mate, you don't get a vote. You're not putting in the kitty. So that's the kind of thing that we need to we need to do. How did they get rid of the poll tax? Well, violence. They went to London and they turned the cars over. They broke all the windows. It was violent. There was only about 10,000 demonstrators at most. All right. It got rid of the poll tax in no time at all. What about hunting? 400,000 people went to London. They didn't even drop a bit of litter.
Yes.
The meetings in Hyde Park, there was no litter, and they all went home and they didn't commit any crime whatsoever, no violence at all. The fox hunting bill went through. The only thing modern politicians understand, and I hate saying this, and it's a sorry thing, is violence. It was the same, if you remember, the Liverpool riots.
Yes.
Michael Heseltine got on the train. He raced up there with a checkbook at the High Port. It was violent. Here, have some money. Violence. Am I advocating violence? No, but what I'm saying, you said, well, how do we do this? How do we actually make this happen? Well, violence. What great revolution has taken place historically without violence?
None.
I don't know any.
No, there hasn't been one. And just to touch on another subject with the time we've got left, during this ongoing conflict that's been going on for 1,000 years before you and I were born, it'll go on 1,000 years after you and I are no longer here. This is the situation in between the Israelis and Gaza. Although Israel's formation is only really fairly recent, but the ideological wars are going on. But we're seeing it on the streets now, Godfrey. These people are mobilised. Labour MPs and Labour councillors are throwing in the red rosettes. Now, the mobilisation, the violence you're talking about is happening, but it's happening in the wrong direction if you care about this country and its national sovereignty. So you are correct in saying people are going to have to do things. We cover a lot on the channel these Blade Runners that are clipping down cameras because the MPs have let them down, the councillors have let them down, the courts have let them down. These are working class people. These are the white van men that are the scourge of so many of these Islington wannabes from both Labour and the Conservative Party. But this action is where we've come down to.
Well, of course, if you're driving your white van trying to get to work, an ordinary working man from the indigenous population, and you get these ridiculous Just Stop Oil demonstrators in the road, all middle class, all privileged in their own way, all referring to oil as a fossil fuel, which of course it isn't. Some of these people don't even have an O level in bloody geography. They're so thick and stupid. Now, what is it that we have when the police arrest the white van man for trying to drag them out of the way and leave the people in the road there? And I've got a video coming out next week on this with some clips. So I've done a video on this. It'll be coming out on my channel next week. It sort of brings a little bit of a grasshopper step to how did we get to this situation? And what's happened to those voices that used to speak up? What's happened to these people who used to be four square for Brexit, suddenly changed their mind? Lord Hague is a classic example, all right? But there are plenty of others who suddenly did an about face. And that's not just in England, that's also in North America. It brings back to Epstein Island. Why have the names never been released to the people who went to Epstein Island? And yet we know, do we not, that the logbooks are all there. So we know that Bill Gates was a regular visitor, but he's squeaky clean because he owns he owns the media, and he's bought his way out of that. But if you look at those list of names, you'll find senators, probably MPs, junior ministers, congressmen, oligarchs in business. I don't know, because they haven't released the list. There is no reason not to release the list, but they won't release it because this is your blackmail tool. And of course, we know that MI6, MI5, and CIA are joined at the hip. Make no mistake about it.
Yes.
They're joined at the hip. So all of a sudden, people either go very silent or they have a Damascene conversion to their original point of view. Hague is a classic example, but there are plenty of others. And of course, we know, do we not, that some of these guys have a question mark over their sexuality in some way. It's not a secret.
Well, we go back to Oxford and Cambridge and Eton.
Yeah.
Places
So
like that.
it's all very dodgy, isn't it? It's all very dodgy. So the trouble is, the whole thing now has got so bad that I cannot see any serious change short of some revolution. Now, and of course, you and I both know nobody goes to the barricades with a full tummy. But when it gets really bad, people do. Now, we always think the French do, or the Italians do, you know, the Latin temperament, so on and so forth. But when finally the British working man realizes just how he has been screwed by the establishment, and he's hungry and he can't feed his kids and he can't pay the mortgage, that's when he will go to the barricades. And he'll be right.
Indeed, and people are being pushed into that, and necessity is the mother of all invention, as you correctly say. And we've covered the story very, very closely. I've gone down to Kent and places like that, and I've liaised with people involved, shall we say, obviously publicly and openly. I'm not going to be as stupid as to say they should be doing these things, but I got every sympathy for what they're doing. If they don't cut down these cameras or render them useless, they're out of a job. They're out of a job, they lose their house. If they lose their house, where are their children going to stay? We've got 300,000 people waiting, declared as homeless in this country, Godfrey, and we've got mass, unlimited, unfettered immigration. Sunak's boasting that he can get it down to 450,000. And as you correctly said, you were alluding to the fact that for all the Albanians he stopped coming in dinghies, they're now coming in the back of trucks. GB News have done a great expose on this, so it's left to the likes of them. Now, as you correctly say, you touched on Epstein Island. We know all these people. We've got the book on it. Ghislaine Maxwell is sitting over there toasting her whole, if you don't mind, if that doesn't upset you, but that's what she's doing. She's on ice. We've got the COVID inquiry right now, which is a sham, a scandal, as Heather Hallett and Hugo Keith basically parade themselves and open themselves to scrutiny. You've got Boris Johnson saying, I didn't know what was going on. I mean, direct action is really where we're at within the boundaries of what we can do.
Well, of course, the more this comes up, and I said, of course, as you know, I finished my city career as the chief executive of a life insurance company. So I'm used to mortality statistics, interpreting mortality statistics, and heading up an actuarial team. I'm on the risk analysis side, not the actuarial side, but I know how all the numbers work. And I said very early on, when the numbers were becoming quite obvious, you know, you can see the trend developing, because that's what I used to do for a living. I'm quite well paid doing it as well, and quite good at it.
And excellent at it, award-winning.
Yeah, so I was quite good at it. Yeah. And so I knew that sooner or later you can't hide the numbers. Numbers don't lie. But of course, the first people coming out were Lincoln Life, Metropolitan Life, and the really big insurance companies were saying, just a minute, there's a really unbelievable mortality statistic coming in young men in between 29 and 38.
Yes.
It's the spike. If in those days, in my day, if there was even a 1% spike in mortality in some field, in some age group, or some domestic thing, that would show 1%. Yeah. We're talking 16%, 17%. It's off the Richter scale, excess deaths, all this kind of thing. And of course, every one of those has a family. Now, we're counting them the other day, my wife and I. We live in a rural community. We sort of all know each other a bit. 12, I could name you 12 people who were hitherto fit until they'd had the jab, who now have cardiac problems or have had blood clot problems or turbo cancers. All right, I could name them to you.
Indeed.
Not one has associated the jab with it. Not a single one has gone, God, I wish I hadn't had the jab. They all think it's a coincidence. And now if you imagine that we've just been doing our Christmas cards and stuff, my wife and I suppose we have an association, if you will, friends, family, neighbors, call it what you like, of maybe 80. When I was in office, we used to get and send 300 or 400 Christmas cards. You know, well, that's sort of like. But now, just being sort of ordinary Joes. So let's say we know 80 people.
Yes.
If I know 12 have been seriously hurt or a mystery jab, mystery cardiac, mystery turbo cancers, that's 20%. That's huge. 20%.
I know.
Every single one, incidentally, younger than me.
Yeah.
Well, fair enough, everybody's younger than me now. But I mean, these were people from the fox hunting field, so they're fit. This is quite the most extraordinary phenomenon. I might have mentioned it to you before, but when you look at risk assessment, which is my field, which I did do my exams to get. If you look at risk, one of the biggest profit-making things we used to have was something called group life. Group life assurance. So if you are working for almost any FTSE company or any mid-sized company, you get 4 times death in service and a widow's pension stuff. That comes up with the rations. Now, those people were called Class A lives. They were all Class A lives because you wouldn't be recruited by a FTSE company or a middle-sized company in Great Britain or America. You would not be recruited unless you were fit, because you would normally go for a medical before they took you on. So they were dealing in first-class lives. So they could give you 4 or 5 times death in service lump sum at very cheap rates because nobody died. Hardly anybody claimed.
Yes. And
the mortality survival rate was demonstrably bigger than the general rate. Well, it would be, wouldn't it? You know, it would be, wouldn't it? Now, those group lives have gone above the general rate. This is extraordinary actuarially. This is stunning from an actuarial perspective. Nobody's talking about it. They've closed down any investigation. And of course, where they should have been covering this in the COVID examination of these things, of course, this is pure yes minister, isn't it?
It is.
Oh, how do we get away? We'll have a royal commission. Or we'll have some. Let's have a big. Where's the best place to hide a leaf? It's on a tree. So you have a really big investigation by the great and the good, and all your paid people, all your paid hacks, covered by paid hacks, QCs, and all the rest of it, who lead questions. So all you've had is internal squabbling between these rather appalling people, Boris Johnson and his clique, and they're also ghastly, it's dreadful. They're vomit-making people. Yes. But what they actually haven't said, they haven't addressed in the elephant in the room, is why did we do this to start with? And why has there been no inquiry on the mortality statistics? So it's one huge whitewash, which has cost a fortune.
Godfrey, I would love to see you at the COVID inquiry. If we had the chance to have a wild card entry, I would pay any sum of money for you to be there, sir, with your evidence, with your slides, with the plethora of information that you have, not just from your risk assurance background, your numbers, your facts. You've got anecdotes, you've got people you've spoken to, you've got people that you know. We've had freedom of information requests from Australia that are pointing out the dangers of these vaccines and the actual damage that's done. I think Andrew Bridgen's maybe been the only MP, and Sir Christopher Hope as well. He's done his little bit, but they've actually stood up and been booted to the curb for their trouble. As you say, there are some people out there, is it cognitive dissonance? Is it mass Stockholm syndrome? But there are none as blind as those who will not see.
I'm afraid so. I've got more. Maybe on another day we'll have a chat. I could tell you quite a lot. There's quite a lot of actuarial anecdotes that I could give you over past history, which actually shows up other things which were a great scare. AIDS was one back in the 80s. I could tell you all about AIDS and the fake numbers about AIDS too.
Involving Fauci.
Yeah.
Fauci. But look, we've got say a couple of minutes left. Is there a Christmas message that you have for a little ray of sunshine, a little bit of hope, and not only make it as pleasurable as it was when you smacked Crick over the head with a magazine. Make it as pleasurable as that, because I can't get enough of that clip personally.
I couldn't buy a drink in Yorkshire, for months. Every time I went to a pub, people were coming up buying me a drink.
Well, where was your cricket bat?
Well, of course, up in Yorkshire, that's what they said. Thought I was a bit of a willy woofter for not using a brick.
Well, look, just a little Christmas message in the last couple of minutes, just for our viewers and listeners. A little Godfrey Bloom Christmas.
Well, okay.
Message.
Well, what can I say? Well, I will say just one thing. I'm a great historian. I'm always curled up with a history book, and I have seen this island in very turbulent times. From the days of King Alfred the Great, we've had very, very difficult times, and we've always, because we are an island race, and we are who we are. I believe that we will come out of this. I'm not sure how or why or when, but the form book is that we will win through in the end. So if you look down here, look, how many races have we been in? How many have we won? Most.
Indeed. I think that's the perfect way to look at it. Anyone interested in conquering us can come back in 1,000 years. But listen, we recommend to our followers and listeners that aren't aware of your work to follow you on Twitter, to sign up onto your website, to get involved with Godfrey's fantastic work. For us, he's at the top of the tree as far as political voices are concerned at Herd Immunity News. Honor and a privilege to have you on, Mr. Godfrey Bloom. Thank you so very much indeed, sir. And a happy
very
Christmas
kind of you to invite me.
You and your family, and a happy Hogmanay.
Thank you so much.
Cheers, Godfrey. Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.